Selhurst Park, the home of Crystal Palace and Charlton Athletic. Their new temporary offices being swung into place, Charlton reckon on being ready for action by Thursday. From next season, they'll have purpose-built offices inside the stadium. The lottery is already in business, working from a place in the car park, and Britain's unique ground-sharing scheme is underway. Ron notes the Palace chairman keeping a watchful eye for his new partners.
I really don't see a conflict in the use of the stadium, and it's very important that each club retains its identity for its own supporters. We want rivalry, but friendly rivalry or intense rivalry. We don't want to be enemies.
Nodes accepts football is eyeing them as guinea pigs, but forecasts others will follow suit. The cost sharing makes it inevitable.
We're looking to survive just the same way as Charlton are looking to survive. They have a different set of problems, but of course we have a stadium where our rates are £25,000 a year, and we get no help from the local authority on that. Our rates are assessed on the average gate at £30,000, and we're at 30,000 people, and we're in Division 1. We've never had a rate reduction because we're averaging 6,500. Our water rates are another 10,000 a year, so that's 35,000 a year we're paying for our stadium. I've no doubt Charlton are paying the same, so that'll be cut in half immediately.
Former chairman Michael Glixton is suing Charlton for £500,000 following their sudden departure from the Valley last month. Charlton walked out on the remaining 8.5 years of their lease at the Valley when Glixton, who owns the land, announced plans to develop part of the ground. But the club have refused to pay the £70,000 a year rent for the remainder of the lease. John Fryer, the Charlton chairman, claims the lease was invalid because of the ground's bad state of repair. But if the courts rule against Charlton, they'll be left with a bill they can't afford to pay. Now that they've moved in with neighbours Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park, Charlton have no assets other than the players. Meanwhile, their controversial ground sharing agreement is already causing friction. Manager Lenny Lawrence is furious that last night's match against Chelsea was delayed 20 minutes because the floodlights weren't turned on in time. And he's also annoyed that his new landlords won't let his players train on the Selhurst Park pitch. But Lawrence says he still believes Charlton's marriage with Crystal Palace will survive.
Controversy in plenty, ill feeling too, from those who wanted the club to stay where it was. But Charlton not only moved on, at once they started to move up the league. Today they stand fourth in the table, and the talk is of promotion to the First Division. But what about the move and the problems it's brought? Simon Reed now reports.
September the 21st was the day of reckoning. 63 years of proud tradition meant nothing. They were closing the Valley, one of the most famous, and at one stage the biggest ground in the Football League. The fans were not only despondent, they were angry. The souvenirs were carved out of frustration, but the reality was that Charlton Athletic were now the tenants at Selhurst Park. The mood at the time was that the life force had gone out of the club. However it was dressed up, they would always be the poor relations at their new home. They were there in name, but many fans doubted if they were really there in spirit. Makeshift and temporary-looking offices didn't help the image of a club moving forward, yet incredibly out of all the adversity came a Dunkirk spirit. Since the move, Charlton have gone from strength to strength, and the porter cabin is thriving.
Hello, Charlton Athletic. Yes, prices in the member stand are £4.50 for adults and £3 for juveniles and senior citizens. You're welcome, thank you.
Amidst the new chaos, the man who's pushed Charlton to their new dizzy heights is Lenny Lawrence. What were his thoughts on the move?
Obviously, it was a sad thing to do, but financially and commercially, it was inevitable, and you have to accept that in this day and age. But obviously, it wasn't an easy decision, and you know, a little part of you will always be back there. But at the end of the day, you know, 30 years of how can I say, neglect have resulted in this decision, not just the 18 months under Sonny's rule, which people have suggested unfairly.
Do you think it's irreversible? No chance of going back?
I wouldn't have thought so. I wouldn't have thought so.
What's it taken out of you, personally, these last 3 years?
I had black hair when I started. No, obviously it's been a bit nerve-wracking at times, but I mean, I feel much better for it now. I mean, the pressure at the top is insignificant compared to the pressure at the bottom. And fortunately, during the financial trouble, I was surrounded by players and a staff who cared about Charlton. Several of the players have been there a long time, and we battled on, and our spirit got us through. Had I been surrounded by a different type of player, it may have been different.
But you must care about Charlton too.
Very much so. I mean, obviously you don't go through the experiences I've been through without some sort of passion and feeling for the club, you know, and maybe even more so as a result of the bad experiences we've had. And whatever happens to me in the future, obviously I'll always have an emotional attachment to Charlton, yeah.
It's very strange. I thought March '84 I had seen everything that's possible to see in football. And if someone said to me in 18 months' time you're going to be a part of a club sharing someone else's ground, I don't think I would have believed it. But to me it's circumstances that you just got to take in your stride and do the best you can, because if we hadn't moved, maybe there wouldn't be a Charlton at the end of the day.
You must feel immensely proud, Lenny.
Yeah, I can take credit for surrounding myself with a bunch of players whose character and attitude and spirit are a credit. Whether or not we'll be good enough at the end of the day to get to the First Division, only time will tell. I don't know. But what I know is that for their character, as I say, and their attitude, you couldn't work with a better bunch of players.
Mm. But you must go home feeling pretty pleased with yourself.
When you're the manager, I don't think it's an ego thing. I just think you're so busy thinking about so many different things and so other people and the players and the move and everything else. You don't have time, perhaps, for your own feelings, you know. And I don't regard it as an ego thing. If I can get Charlton to the First Division eventually, I would have repaid Mr. Fry's benevolence and put Charlton where I think its rightful place is.
And yet,
if
you do that, there are going to be people in big clubs who are going to say, look what that fella's achieved with no money, all those problems.
Well, that's just maybe, but I mean, I like the people I work for, and I think in this day and age that's an important thing. And I hope that, you know, the relationship between us continues for a long time.
It's a unique case of a club going home to play away, as Charlton take on Palace for the first time since moving in at Selhurst Park. 4 months ago, Charlton said goodbye to the Valley. Now they've just about settled in at Selhurst with the help of a few simple changes. But Saturday's fixture means they'll be on the move again. Palace are the home side, so it's back to the visitors' dressing room for Charlton.
We feel 100% home at Selhurst Park, so whether we're in the visitors' dressing room or the home dressing room, it doesn't really matter really. It's out on the pitch that matters, and we feel 100% at home playing at Selhurst Park now.
If the players find it confusing, what about the fans? Charlton supporters will be denied their usual home comforts in the main stand as they rush it back to the visitors' enclosure.
We'll just be treating it as a home game, although we'll be in a different changing room and our supporters will be housed in a different place. But, you know, I want our players to imagine they're at home, they are at home, and to treat the whole thing as if we were playing a home fixture.
Lenny Lawrence, good morning to both of you, gentlemen. Let's settle that thorny issue first. Who's home and who's away? Who's claiming the home match today?
We're definitely at home.
You're claiming the home match. So, basically, you must be favoured to win then if you're at home.
So not with our current home form, we'd be better off playing away.
Yeah. Actually, quite seriously, Lenny, is there any sort of sinister aspect? Has anybody complained that both you fellas could be said to be playing 2 home matches this year, where one should be home, one should be away?
No, not at all. I mean, technically we're the away team today, but we're treating it as a home fixture, and the good thing is that, you know, both crowds hopefully will treat it as a home fixture, so we should get a good game.
Okay. Do you both come in the same car? You don't live at the same home, do you?
No.
All right. Well, we've cleared that up. We cleared the foul rumours up anyway, that you both live together and share the same car and use the same washing machine. But we'll be taking up the more serious aspects of the whole scheme a little bit later on in sport. For the moment, thanks. And has it worked? Lenny, do you feel that the ground sharing has worked?
Yeah, I think so. We had a few teething problems early on. We had to play one game in the dark, but
yes,
apart from that, it's you know, it's gone okay in the last 2 or 3 months, and we feel at home there, and I think the thing's working okay.
Yes. And for you, Steve, obviously, I suppose initially Crystal Palace must have had some doubts about the whole prospect of ground sharing after everybody wants a ground to themselves deep down, I suppose.
Yes, purely because it's so new, nobody knew what to expect. But since Charlton have been there, I can honestly say I haven't seen Lenny at the ground. So we're not living on each other's doorstep, we're separate clubs at each end of the ground.
Yes. Do you feel that there's a danger the fans, when they look at the fixture list and look at the fixture, that there's a loss of identity at all? I mean, obviously, we heard last weekend, didn't we, still 1 or 2 Charlton fans shouting for the Valley, the old ground.
I think you're bound to get that. I mean, we have a lot of supporters who go back a lot of years and have been with us through thick and thin, and just at the time we're getting a decent team together, they feel that it would be so much better if it was at the Valley, but financially and commercially, the move from the Valley was inevitable and forced on us by outside pressures. And I think most of them have accepted the fact now that we're at Selhurst Park, and unfortunately those few who haven't, you know, will lose.
Only in particular, let's go back to, I think it's March 1984. Times are very different then, weren't they? And I think we can see an example of the awful tension that was rippling right round that ground at the Valley. In fact, the prospect of closure.
My mortgage is due on the 17th, so we might be having a collection. I don't know whether you'll help me, Simon, with £1 or £2 to pay it off. But obviously, you know, things are very nervous, especially for my family. I mean, my wife doesn't really know what's happening. And all I've got to do now is just hope that the consortium sort things out and get paid next week.
But it must have been difficult over the last few days, not knowing what's going on.
And not being paid as well. That's the main thing. I haven't had any money for 6 weeks.
Good old Derek Hales, but beneath the smiles there, actually, all was far from fun. That actually was the morning of the decision day, and hours later you heard the good news that Charlton was to survive.
Yeah, it's a similar thing to what Swansea are going through now. We were wound up in the High Court on a Tuesday afternoon, it was, after about the 9th adjournment, surprisingly, and we had virtually 9 days, or the new people had 9 days to get league approval for the new company, and it was a very hair-raising time for everybody concerned. If it hadn't been done, of course a lot of people would have been out of work. But it's a credit to the new board really that in under 2 years we've put our house in order, undergone a ground sharing, and are in a position to maybe mount a promotion challenge for the First Division.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of giggles this morning about the ground sharing, but I mean, the serious aspect is that, as you say, Swansea's case comes up again on Monday. This must be the way forward for several smaller clubs, mustn't it? Ground sharing is the logical thing.
I don't think so, really, to be fair. Like, I think it's happened in this case because, as Lenny says, of outside pressures. But the pride involved, so many supporters, both from Charlton and Palace, are not keen on the idea. The tradition involved. I don't think there'll be many clubs who'll see it as a way out, no matter how much economic common sense it does mean.
But let's be fair, I mean, if the club's in grave trouble, and sadly I think we have to say that 1 or 2 more could be in grave trouble soon, surely that is the answer for them.
Well, again, it could happen in London, but if you go up north, there's not many places where the grounds are close enough that people will travel. People at Rochdale's only 1,500 go anyway. If they move somewhere else, then they wouldn't be prepared to make that extra journey.
The Crystal Palace-Charlton match should be interesting today, if only for the fact that it's the first time the landlord has played the tenant on a shared ground in the Football League. Reporting for us, John Motson.
Hazelwood, he can hit them from distance. And Lee's in there, tap back, and, oh goodness me, Alvin Martin kicked the ball against Steve Walford, and how it wasn't an own goal, I'll never know. And a good ball, Humphrey. And Grit's in a good position here, number 7.
Well, after that stirring FA Cup display against West Ham last Sunday, Charlton Athletic are surely entitled to crowds bigger than the average of 5,000 who've been watching them here at Selhurst Park since they moved from the Valley 3 months ago. Today's local derby, for example, should draw nearer 10,000. But although it's being played on Charlton's home ground, Charlton Athletic are in fact playing away. And if that sounds contradictory, well, it's also unique. Because although ground sharing is commonplace in Italy, and although back in the last century Everton and Liverpool once shared a ground, today is the first time that 2 English league clubs have played each other in the stadium which represents home to both of them. Confused? Well, my sympathies lie with those involved. First, the Charlton players. When they arrive today, they'll find their normal car park closed, and they'll go into the main car park used during the rest of the week by shoppers. Then they'll have to remind themselves not to go into the home dressing room. Palace will be in there today, but to turn right instead into the away team's quarters. Then the groundsman, Len Chatterton, who's constantly changing the corner flags these days, depending on which club is at home. And then the supporters. Last Sunday, Charlton's fans were allowed at the Sainsbury's end, but today that's Palace territory, which is fair enough, since the Palace club offices are part of the supermarket complex. No wonder people sometimes lose their way.
Early on there was a referee who
because storming into the Palace. I think he was a little bit late. He came into the Palace offices and was quite convinced he wanted to negotiate with me on some matter, and it took me quite a time to explain that it wasn't a Crystal Palace match, it was a Charlton match, so he had to toddle off down the other end of the ground and deal with Graham Horton.
The Palace manager doesn't have to go very far for his lunch. There's a fish and chip shop right underneath his office. But once you've done your shopping here at the Palace end and avoided the temptation of that nightclub, you don't need to hire a car to go to Charlton, because their offices are barely 200 yards away, in a porter cabin at the opposite end of the ground. But when they first arrived, even the porter cabin wasn't there.
The staff turned up in their cars, just sat in their cars until our temporary porter cabin arrived. And then we all used a small porter cabin, the whole 6 of us. The big porter cabin that you're in now was still in 4 different places and had to be decorated and put together.
What hiccups have occurred since?
We've had 1 or 2 hiccups in the dressing room whereby there was lack of hot water at one of our home games, but it's all been taken in the right spirit.
The bath water was certainly hot at Selhurst Park last Sunday, and so was the atmosphere when Charlton went out of the FA Cup, narrowly and belatedly, to First Division West Ham. And a miscue by Humphrey and Machiavelli. Can he do it? It looks as though it's going in for Tony Cottee! Charlton's cup exit on Sunday was followed little more than 24 hours later by that of Crystal Palace, beaten by Luton. So now the 2 clubs and their respective managers have to concentrate on promotion, starting with the match in which they play each other today.
We are treating it absolutely as a home game, and I want to get it into my players' minds that it is a home game.
And how are you approaching it?
Well, we've got to go along the same lines. We'll have our normal preparation, and Charlton will come here. They'll have the normal away team hospitality, cold tea and no hot water in the dressing room.
That's a normal home team hospitality.
No, I've been told that we're going to the same hotel for a pre-match meal, which should be interesting as well. We might make it to 3 o'clock.
But we are looking at you now in the home dugout. I mean, surely you can't sit side by side tomorrow.
No,
exactly.
We're sitting in this dugout.
I think actually he's been here long enough. Time to go, lad.
And they've got about 2 and a bit hours to sort it out.
London is already guaranteed at least 1 new top-flight club because Charlton and Wimbledon are both certain to finish in the top 4. If Charlton beat relegated Fulham at Selhurst Park tonight and the Dons can see off visitors Stoke, both clubs will have 1 foot firmly through the First Division door. 74 points will guarantee promotion. Dave Bassett, the Wimbledon boss, says that's 2 points less than the target he'd set his players, so he's got to feel confident. Bassett calls up Andy Thorne to replace injured defender Mike Smith. Well, Charlton, meanwhile, know that a win tonight will almost certainly end their 29-year exile from Division 1, although manager Lenny Lawrence says he's taking nothing for granted.
I think, obviously, we'll be virtually there. Personally, I won't be celebrating anything or accepting that until it's a mathematical certainty. People say we've got a better goal difference than Portsmouth, which we have, but if we were to lose the last 2 games, say maybe 3-0, and they were to win their last game 3 or 4-0, that could easily be turned upside down. So, as far as I'm concerned, until we've got 4 more points, then we're not in the First Division.
Do you think this might be the match that'll finally bring the fans over here?
I'd like to think so, but realistically I don't. I mean, I think we'll get maybe a 7,000 or 8,000 gate, but I don't think we'll go to 5 figures unless the opposition bring a large number of fans with them, and I don't think, in all honesty, that Fulham fans will be there in those numbers.
Selhurst Park. Charlton just have the players they did last Saturday against Blackburn to win a game. Charlton went ahead in the 7th minute when Jim Melrose headed home Mike Flanagan's corner. Just before half-time, Mark Reed scored from the penalty spot. And John Pearson scored his 14th goal of the season from a Flanagan cross 19 minutes into the second half. And now waiting for me, hopefully at Selhurst Park, is manager Lenny Lawrence of Charlton. Good evening, Lenny.
Evening,
Thanks for waiting for us. What's your latest team news down there?
Yeah, Jim Milrose's toe's okay. He's been pass fit, so we'll be the same as we were on Saturday.
Because he was quite doubtful, I believe.
Yeah, his toe's it's painful, but there's no fracture, so he'll be okay.
Now, you bought him from Manchester City for quite a lot of money for you. He's made a lot of difference, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's had a little bit of aggression to our forward line, and he's got 5 goals in 8 games, which is an unbelievable ratio. So, you know, he's on the way to paying back his transfer fee already.
The crowds haven't been as good, have they, as they should have been? I mean, you moved from the Valley halfway through the season. Is it that the fans still don't like that move?
I think our fans pick and choose their games. They won't come to the run-of-mill games, or a lot of them won't. But hopefully this game and the last game against Wimbledon, which are very, very important to the club, I'm hoping there's going to be a better turnout.
And your chances for promotion?
Well, we're quietly confident, but, you know, Fulham aren't going to lay down and die tonight. I'm expecting them to be tougher opposition than they were last week, and if we approach it right, we'll be OK, and if we don't, we'll be in trouble.
And what about your rivals, Wimbledon?
Well, you know, theirs is a little bit harder than us. They've got to win 2 of their last 4 games to be certain, and they finish up with 3 consecutive away games. So it's not all over for them yet either.
Well, good luck tonight, then.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Tuesday's 2-0 win against Fulham virtually ensuring First Division football for the first time since 1957.
Last week, Charlton won at Craven Cottage and condemned Fulham to next season's 3rd Division. A repeat victory at Sellers Park on Tuesday took Charlton to within 1 point of the First Division. John Pearson turns in substitute Robert Lee's cross to break the deadlock, but that was after nearly 70 minutes of suspense. Fulham still making a fight of it, but right at the end, it was another cross from Lee that did the damage, John Marshall turning the ball into his own net. Afterwards, the Charlton fans were prepared to ignore the single point still needed for mathematical certainty of promotion. And in saluting the players, they didn't leave out Charlton's modest manager, Lenny Lawrence.
I wouldn't like to have let the board down after they backed me. I wouldn't like to have let the supporters down who have shown, you know, sort of loyalty and haven't had much to shout about in the last 30 years or the 29 years since we were back in the First Division. And having got so close, if we'd have failed, people would have said, oh, same old Charlton, here we go again. Well, in actual fact, it isn't the same old Charlton, because the players who wear the Charlton shirts now may not be as great a side as the old side in the 40s, but certainly no better set of characters have ever worn those shirts.
Charlton on their way back to the division they last graced when shorts were long and pictures were black and white.
Now got to Shackleton, but Shackleton not been in the game at all. He's done nothing right so far. Now it's number 7, Laurie for Charlton. And headed by Rod, it's a goal! Midway through the first half now, Charlton leading by 1-0. Charlton, of course, in the dark shirt, a much the better side. Charlton have just been a thing of tattered bits and pieces, and once again it's Charlton who come on the attack, and Rod shoots into the net. What a goal! It's Kinsey, number 11, out to Laurie, and once again Sunderland are going backwards and struggling all the time, as Summers scores with a header.
So you're back, Charlton. But are the fans going to forgive you for the move?
Well, I think there are a percentage that perhaps didn't understand that that was inevitable. And they're just looking at those pictures, all the glory that Lenny and the players deserve, no question about it. The club wouldn't have been alive if it wasn't for John Fryer and John Sunday, the 2 men who put £2 million into the club to keep it going. And the losses now in a promotion season, and this is interesting, I think, for all clubs, are over £450,000. And that's a good season. Well, it's terrifying, because if those sort of people don't subsidise the game, or we don't get the crowds back quickly, there will be clubs die all over the place. Now, the awful thing about it is, and you know this at Brighton, which is the club that you support so much, if you happen to fail, the directors who have put money in to keep the club get abused as well. So, one, you're subsidising clubs all over the country, giving up your time and money to keep them alive, and at the end of the day, you're getting abused for it. John Fryer got abused for making a move that was absolutely imperative for the club to stay alive. It would have cost another £3 million, which nobody was going to give, to keep it going at the Valley.